Romance novels have long held a place in the literary world as one of the most enduring and commercially successful genres. Defined by their central focus on love and relationships, these novels have existed for centuries, evolving with cultural and societal shifts. Early examples can be traced back to ancient myths, medieval courtly love tales, and the sentimental novels of the 18th century. By the 19th century, writers such as Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters brought depth and psychological realism to romantic fiction, setting a high literary standard for future generations. As the genre moved into the 20th century, it underwent significant changes, becoming more accessible to the masses through serialized publications, affordable paperbacks, and eventually, the rise of modern romance publishers. Amidst this evolving literary landscape, one name stood out as a dominant force: Barbara Cartland. Barbara Cartland remains one of the most prolific and commercially successful authors of all time, having written over 700 books that collectively sold more than 1 billion copies worldwide. Often referred to as the Queen of Romance, her career spanned several decades, from the 1920s until her death in 2000. Known for her signature pink outfits, extravagant lifestyle, and unwavering belief in traditional romance, Cartland became not just a writer but a public personality synonymous with the genre. Her novels followed a distinct formula: a pure, innocent heroine, a dashing aristocratic hero, and an unwavering belief in true love conquering all obstacles. This formula, while often criticized for being repetitive, was also the key to her success. At a time when the world was rapidly changing, marked by wars, feminist movements, and cultural shifts, Cartland's books provided an escape into a world where love was uncomplicated and virtue was always rewarded. Her influence extended beyond literature, shaping the way romance was perceived in popular culture. Unlike the complex and often morally ambiguous relationships portrayed in modern romance novels, Cartland's work upheld a rigid moral structure, emphasizing chastity, duty, and nobility. This adherence to traditional values resonated with many readers, particularly during times of social upheaval when such ideals offered comfort and stability. While many critics dismissed her writing as simplistic and formulaic, her impact on the romance genre is undeniable. She helped define a style of romance that, for better or worse, shaped the expectations of millions of readers. Furthermore, her prolific output set a precedent for romance writers, demonstrating that commercial success in the genre was not only possible but could reach unprecedented heights. Despite her extraordinary success, the trajectory of Barbara Cartland's career was not without its challenges. While she dominated the romance novel industry for much of the mid-20th century, her influence began to wane towards the latter part of her life. The very formula that had made her famous became a point of contention in a world that was rapidly evolving. The rise of more progressive romance narratives, featuring independent heroines and complex relationships, clashed with the rigid structures of Cartland's idealized love stories. Readers increasingly gravitated towards authors who offered a modern take on romance, such as Nora Roberts, Danielle Steele, and the writers of Harlequin and Mills and Boon novels. These new narratives introduced heroines who were not just passive figures waiting to be saved by noblemen, but women who actively shaped their own destinies. This shift marked a stark contrast to Cartland's world, where love was a matter of destiny rather than personal choice. As the publishing industry evolved with the rise of mass-market paperbacks, television adaptations, and later, digital platforms, Cartland's appeal struggled to keep pace with the changing times. Younger generations found her themes outdated, and literary critics increasingly dismissed her work as lacking depth and originality. While she continued writing prolifically until her death, her books gradually lost the commercial dominance they once held. By the 1990s, the literary world had moved on, embracing new voices and perspectives that reflected the complexities of modern relationships. Cartland's resistance to adapting her storytelling to the evolving cultural landscape ultimately contributed to her decline in popularity. Analyzing the rise and fall of Barbara Cartland is significant in understanding the broader evolution of the romance genre. Her success demonstrated the immense commercial potential of romance novels and their ability to captivate a vast readership. However, her decline serves as a lesson on the necessity of adaptation in a constantly shifting literary market. Romance fiction continues to thrive today, but it has diversified in ways that Cartland never embraced. Modern romance novels explore themes of feminism, LGBTQ+ relationships, multiculturalism, and psychological depth, elements that were largely absent in her works. While some aspects of her storytelling remain nostalgic and comforting to certain readers, her rigid adherence to a specific formula ultimately limited her longevity in a genre that thrives on reinvention. The examination of Cartland's legacy also raises larger questions about the role of tradition versus innovation in literature. Should romance novels always adhere to a well-established formula, or should they evolve to reflect contemporary values? Cartland's career provides a fascinating case study in how a singular vision of romance can achieve massive success, but also risk obsolescence if it fails to engage with cultural change. Her life and work remain emblematic of a particular era in romantic fiction. One that, while influential, eventually gave way to more complex and diverse narratives. Even though Barbara Cartland's influence has diminished over time, her contribution to the romance genre cannot be ignored. She set a high bar for prolific storytelling, demonstrated the vast commercial potential of romance novels, and helped define the escapist nature of romantic fiction for millions of readers. Her name remains synonymous with a bygone era of literary romance, where love was pure, simple, and idealized. Whether viewed as a trailblazer or a relic of the past, Cartland's legacy continues to spark discussions about the evolution of romantic storytelling. In tracing her rise and fall, one gains deeper insight into not only her career but also the larger forces that shape literary trends and the ever-changing expectations of readers. Barbara Cartland was born on July 9, 1901, in Edgbaston, Birmingham, England, into a family of modest aristocratic lineage. She was the eldest child of Major James Bertram Cartland and Mary Hamilton Scobell Cartland. Though not immensely wealthy, the Cartlands belonged to the upper-middle-class social circle, with connections to the British gentry. This privileged yet precarious position in society shaped young Barbara's worldview, reinforcing ideas of nobility, decorum, and romance, concepts that would later become the bedrock of her writing. Barbara's early childhood was marked by both privilege and instability. Her father, Major Cartland, was a former army officer and businessman, but his business ventures were not always successful. While the family maintained the appearance of prosperity, they faced financial difficulties behind the scenes. Her mother, Mary Cartland, was a strong-willed woman, known for her resilience and charm. After her husband's death, she played a significant role in shaping Barbara's ambition, instilling in her a belief that women could rise above their circumstances through determination and the right social connections. The greatest tragedy of Barbara Cartland's early life came during World War I, when her father was killed in action in 1918. Major Cartland's death devastated the family both emotionally and financially. Suddenly, Barbara's mother found herself a widow with 3 young children to support. With no substantial income, Mary Cartland moved the family to a smaller residence and took in sewing work to sustain them. This period of financial hardship left a lasting impact on Barbara, reinforcing her belief in the power of love, resilience, and social climbing, central themes that would later define her novels. Despite these difficulties, Barbara received a decent education, attending the Alice Otley School in Worcester and later the prestigious Malvern Girls' College. Though not particularly academically inclined, she excelled in English and displayed an early flair for storytelling. Her natural charm and confidence made her a standout among her peers. She was particularly fascinated by Victorian and Edwardian literature, absorbing the grand romances, chivalric ideals, and moralistic undertones that characterized the works of authors like Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, and George Meredith. The influence of these writers is evident in her own literary style, which often echoed the grandeur and innocence of 19th-century romance, despite being written in the 20th century. Apart from literature, Barbara was captivated by theater and social events. As a teenager, she developed a love for dressing up, attending parties, and mingling with high society. She was deeply inspired by the elegance and manners of Edwardian England, an era she saw as the epitome of romance and sophistication. However, the Roaring Twenties, the decade in which she came of age, was starkly different from the world she idealized. Women were increasingly gaining independence, rejecting the rigid moral codes of the past, and embracing a freer, more modern approach to love and relationships. Barbara, however, clung to the values of a bygone era, believing in courtly love, gallant gentlemen, and virtuous heroines. This nostalgic idealism would later define her novels, setting them apart from the more liberated narratives emerging in contemporary literature. By the time she finished school, Barbara was determined to make a name for herself. She had no intention of fading into obscurity, nor did she want to depend on marriage alone for security. Encouraged by her mother's resilience and her own ambition, she moved to London in the early 1920s, where she initially worked as a society columnist for the Daily Express. This job was a turning point in her life, as it exposed her to the world of British aristocracy, high society scandals, and the romantic intrigues of the elite. Her experiences as a journalist not only honed her writing skills but also provided her with an insider's perspective on the glamorous lives of the wealthy, material she would later weave into her books. Barbara's time in London also introduced her to the world of celebrity culture and royalty. She was fascinated by the lavish lifestyles of lords, ladies, and film stars, and she skillfully built connections within these circles. She was particularly drawn to figures like the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII, and Wallis Simpson, whose scandalous romance and eventual abdication of the throne embodied the kind of high-stakes love story she adored. These experiences deepened her conviction that romance, when combined with aristocracy and grandeur, could be the most compelling subject matter for fiction. Though journalism paid the bills, Barbara harbored greater ambitions. She had long dreamed of becoming a novelist, and by the mid-1920s, she began writing her first novel. Inspired by the romantic dramas she observed in high society, she penned Jigsaw, which was published in 1923. The book was an immediate success, establishing her as a promising new voice in romance fiction. Though her writing style was still developing, the novel already contained many of the elements that would define her later works: pure heroines, dashing heroes, and an idealized vision of love untouched by cynicism or moral ambiguity. The success of Jigsaw encouraged Barbara to continue writing, and she quickly developed a reputation for producing light, entertaining, and emotionally satisfying love stories. Unlike other writers of the time who explored the complexities of human relationships, Cartland's romances were straightforward fairy tales where love always triumphed. This simplicity appealed to a broad audience, particularly in a post-war era where people sought escapism from the harsh realities of life. However, Barbara Cartland's early career was not without its struggles. While she enjoyed success, she was often dismissed by critics who viewed her work as overly sentimental and lacking in depth. Her books were frequently labeled light reading, a term often used disparagingly. But rather than being discouraged, Cartland embraced this criticism, proudly proclaiming that her goal was to bring hope, happiness, and romance to readers rather than challenge them with heavy intellectual themes. This unapologetic stance defined her entire career and contributed to both her extraordinary popularity and the controversies surrounding her work. In addition to literary critics, Cartland also faced personal challenges. Despite her growing success, she encountered difficulties in her personal relationships. Her first marriage to Alexander McCorquodale, a British Army officer, ended in divorce in 1933. This experience, though painful, only strengthened her belief in the power of true love. She later married Hugh McCorquodale, her first husband's cousin, in 1936, a union that proved much more stable and enduring. Though her personal life had its ups and downs, she remained fiercely independent and focused on her writing career, refusing to let societal expectations dictate her path. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Barbara Cartland continued to build her brand, becoming one of the most recognizable romance authors in Britain. She also developed a distinct personal image, always dressed in soft pastel colors, adorned with extravagant hats, and exuding an air of aristocratic elegance. This carefully cultivated persona further cemented her association with the world of high romance and made her a figure of fascination in the public eye. Her deep belief in traditional romance, combined with her ability to produce novels at an astonishing pace, allowed her to dominate the genre for decades. She became a symbol of a particular kind of storytelling, one rooted in nostalgia, idealism, and unwavering faith in the power of love. While her books may have seemed out of touch with the modern world, they resonated with millions of readers who longed for a simpler, more romantic vision of life. Barbara Cartland's early years were instrumental in shaping her identity as a writer and public figure. The struggles she faced, financial hardship, the loss of her father, and the expectations placed upon women in her era, only fueled her determination to succeed. Her exposure to Victorian and Edwardian ideals, combined with her first-hand experience of high society and journalism, provided her with the perfect foundation for crafting the escapist, aristocratic romances that became her signature. Even in the face of criticism and changing literary trends, she never wavered from her core belief that love should be pure, noble, and triumphant. These early influences not only defined her work but also set the stage for the extraordinary rise that would follow in the coming decades. Barbara Cartland's journey into the literary world was shaped by a mix of ambition, perseverance, and an unshakable belief in the power of romance. Though she would later become one of the most prolific and widely read romance authors in history, her early attempts at writing were met with challenges, self-doubt, and rejection. She was neither an instant success nor a natural-born literary prodigy. Instead, her rise in the world of publishing was a story of determination, adaptability, and an intuitive understanding of what readers craved. In the early 1920s, as a young woman living in London, Cartland was determined to carve out a place for herself in the literary world. She had been drawn to storytelling since childhood, having been raised on Victorian and Edwardian literature, fairy tales, and romantic legends. However, translating that passion into a viable writing career was not easy. The publishing industry at the time was competitive, and romance novels, though popular, were evolving alongside changing societal norms. Cartland's first attempts at writing were not immediately successful. Like many aspiring authors, she faced rejection letters from publishers who were either unimpressed with her work or felt her stories lacked originality. Some publishers dismissed her writing as too sentimental, while others were hesitant to take a chance on a new author without a literary pedigree. These early setbacks could have discouraged her, but Cartland was not one to give up easily. She continued refining her craft, reading widely, and studying the styles of successful romance writers of the past. Her breakthrough came in 1923 with the publication of her debut novel, Jigsaw. The book was an immediate success, selling well and earning Cartland her first taste of literary recognition. Though not as refined or polished as her later works, Jigsaw contained the essential elements that would define her brand of romance fiction. A strong yet innocent heroine, a dashing and enigmatic hero, a clear moral structure, and an unwavering belief in love's power to conquer all obstacles. The success of Jigsaw was a turning point in her career. It proved that she had an audience and that readers were drawn to her particular brand of storytelling. Encouraged by this response, she quickly followed up with more novels, developing a signature style that would become instantly recognizable in the decades to come. One of the defining characteristics of Cartland's writing was her formulaic approach to romance. While some critics saw this as a weakness, she considered it a strength. Her books were designed to provide readers with comfort, escapism, and emotional satisfaction, and she understood that consistency was key. Readers came to her novels expecting a particular kind of story, one where love triumphed, good always prevailed over evil, and the heroine found happiness through virtue and perseverance. Her writing process was remarkably efficient and disciplined. She dictated her novels to a secretary, often producing multiple books within a short span of time. This method allowed her to write at an astonishing speed, a habit that would later earn her the title of the most prolific romance novelist in history. She embraced her formula, knowing that her readers valued familiarity and reliability in her stories. While Cartland's romances were rooted in traditional values, they were also deeply inspired by classical literature and fairy tales. She saw herself as a modern-day storyteller in the tradition of the Brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen, and even Shakespeare's romantic plays. Many of her plots echoed themes from classic fairy tales. Innocent young women swept off their feet by powerful, mysterious men, obstacles that tested the purity of love, and dramatic climaxes that led to happily ever after endings. Her admiration for Jane Austen, Charlotte Brontë, and Georgette Heyer also played a role in shaping her literary vision. Like Austen, she believed in courtship as a dance of emotions, misunderstandings, and eventual resolutions. Like Brontë, She was fascinated by brooding, enigmatic heroes who concealed deep passions beneath their reserved exteriors. And like Heyer, she infused her novels with aristocratic settings, lavish details, and grand gestures of love. Despite these influences, Cartland's approach was notably less complex and psychologically layered than that of her predecessors. She stripped romance down to its most idealistic and dramatic elements, avoiding deep introspection or ambiguity. Her heroines were rarely conflicted, and moral dilemmas were resolved with clear distinctions between right and wrong. In her world, love was not complicated. It was pure, noble, and transformative. Another crucial factor in Cartland's literary development was the impact of World War I and World War II on the romantic imagination of her era. Having lost her father in the Great War, she understood firsthand the themes of loss, longing, and the fragility of life, all of which played a role in her stories. The wars shaped a generation's attitude toward romance, reinforcing the idea that love was both fleeting and worth fighting for. During and after World War II, people sought escapism from the grim realities of life. The war had upended traditional gender roles. Women had stepped into workplaces. Men had returned from the front lines with psychological scars, and society had undergone profound changes. Yet, despite these transformations, there remained a deep longing for stability, idealism, and romance. Cartland's novels filled this need perfectly, offering a world where love was untainted by cynicism, and where virtue was always rewarded. She also understood that in times of war and social upheaval, nostalgia became a powerful force. Many of her books were set in the past, particularly the Regency and Edwardian eras, allowing readers to escape into an imagined world of elegance, honor, and unbreakable love. This romanticized version of history was not always accurate, but it was deeply appealing to readers who longed for a simpler, more structured vision of love and society. By the 1940s and 1950s, Cartland had fully cemented her formula for success. Her books followed a predictable but emotionally satisfying arc. A beautiful, innocent heroine, often young and virtuous, placed in difficult circumstances. A handsome, powerful, and often brooding hero, who at first appears distant or indifferent. A series of challenges that test the heroine's strength, morality, and devotion. A climactic moment of realization, where the hero recognizes his love for the heroine. A happily ever after ending, reinforcing the idea that true love always triumphs. This structure became her trademark, and while it attracted criticism for its lack of complexity, it also brought her unparalleled commercial success. She had identified a winning formula and saw no reason to change it. In many ways, Barbara Cartland's entry into literature was a battle between artistic vision and commercial appeal. While she faced skepticism from critics, she was embraced wholeheartedly by readers who found solace, joy, and escapism in her stories. She was not interested in literary experimentation or pushing the boundaries of the genre. Her mission was simple: to write about love in its purest and most idealized form. By the time she had fully established herself as a best-selling author, it was clear that she was not just a writer, but a brand. Her image, draped in pastel gowns, adorned with diamonds, and surrounded by an aura of aristocratic glamour, was as much a part of her appeal as her books. She had successfully merged her personal persona with her literary world, creating an unmistakable identity that captivated millions. Her early career demonstrated that while talent and creativity were important, so too were resilience, adaptability, and a deep understanding of audience expectations. Barbara Cartland's rise to fame was not accidental. It was the result of persistence, a keen sense of market trends, and an unwavering commitment to her vision of romance. Her formula, once perfected, became the foundation of a literary empire, propelling her into a level of success few authors ever achieve. Though her approach was simple, its impact was profound. Her books spoke to the universal human desire for love, security, and fairy tale endings. This unwavering commitment to her craft would soon propel her to even greater heights, making her not only a prolific romance novelist but also one of the most commercially successful writers of all time. Barbara Cartland's rise to literary superstardom was nothing short of extraordinary. From the 1930s to the 1970s, she dominated the romance novel market, setting records that remain unmatched. Her ability to produce an astonishing volume of work, combined with her keen understanding of reader expectations, transformed her into an icon of the genre. Over the course of her career, she wrote more than 723 books, earning a place in the Guinness World Records as the most prolific romance writer of all time. This staggering output was the result of an almost mechanical writing process. She dictated her novels to a secretary, often producing multiple books in a single month. Her approach was methodical but effective, ensuring that she maintained a steady stream of publications to meet the insatiable demand of her readers. Unlike many authors who struggled with writer's block or perfectionism, she embraced a philosophy of consistency over complexity, believing that delivering heartfelt stories in rapid succession was more important than literary refinement. Her novels were defined by recurring themes and motifs that became hallmarks of her storytelling. Chief among them was the emphasis on chastity, an element that set her apart from many of her contemporaries. While romance fiction gradually became more explicit during the mid-20th century, Cartland remained resolute in her portrayal of love as something pure, spiritual, and almost sacred. Her heroines were invariably innocent, often naive, and untouched by worldly corruption. Love at first sight was a frequent trope in her books, reinforcing the idea that true love was instant and transcendent. Passion in her stories was rarely physical. It was instead expressed through longing glances, heartfelt declarations, and dramatic circumstances that brought the hero and heroine together. Aristocratic settings played a crucial role in her narratives, transporting readers into a world of grand estates, glittering ballrooms, and nobility-bound romances. Many of her novels took place in the Regency or Edwardian eras, where societal norms reinforced the values she held dear: duty, honor, and the transformative power of love. Her obsession with aristocracy was both personal and literary. She admired the elegance of past generations and sought to recreate that world in her books. These settings allowed for heightened drama, where noble heroines often faced financial ruin, forced marriages, or the need to escape unscrupulous suitors before finding salvation in the arms of a dashing, wealthy, and morally upright hero. The predictability of these storylines was not a drawback, but rather a selling point. Readers came to her books knowing exactly what they would find, and she never disappointed them. At the heart of her success was the enduring appeal of the innocent heroine. Her leading ladies were young, virtuous, and often inexperienced in matters of the world. They were typically placed in perilous situations, whether due to financial hardship, familial obligations, or external threats, that required the intervention of a strong, protective hero. Unlike the more independent heroines of later romance fiction, Cartland's protagonists did not seek to dismantle societal norms or challenge traditional gender roles. Instead, they found happiness through devotion, purity, and unwavering belief in love. The appeal of this archetype was twofold. It provided escapism for readers longing for a world where love was simple and untainted, and it reinforced an idealized notion of femininity that resonated with traditional values. Her personal brand was just as carefully crafted as her books. She became known for her extravagant fashion choices. Her signature pink dresses, elaborate hats, and layers of pearls became synonymous with her public image. She was not merely a writer but a persona, embodying the very ideals she promoted in her fiction. This careful self-presentation earned her the title Queen of Romance, a label she embraced wholeheartedly. Unlike many authors who preferred a degree of anonymity, Cartland was an active participant in her own publicity, frequently appearing in interviews, television programs, and public events dressed in full regalia. Her brand extended beyond her books. She became a cultural icon, representing an idealized, old-world vision of romance and femininity. Her influence on shaping romance literature as an escapist genre was profound. At a time when literature was becoming increasingly modernist and experimental, she remained steadfast in her commitment to traditional storytelling. She understood that readers sought solace in her books, a reprieve from the complexities and cynicism of the modern world. While critics dismissed her work as formulaic and overly sentimental, her fans adored her for providing exactly what they wanted: romance in its purest form, untouched by the darker realities of life. Her novels offered reassurance, a return to simplicity, and the promise that love could conquer all obstacles. During her golden era, she faced both admiration and criticism. While her commercial success was undeniable, Literary circles often dismissed her work as lacking depth. This put her in contrast with other contemporary romance writers, some of whom sought to push the boundaries of the genre. Authors like Georgette Heyer, for example, were praised for their meticulous historical research and wit, while Cartland's works were seen as more straightforward and sentimental. Additionally, as romance fiction began evolving toward more complex characterizations and greater sensuality, her steadfast adherence to innocence and purity seemed increasingly out of step with the times. Yet, this very rigidity in her style ensured her longevity. She remained an institution in romance literature, while many other trends came and went. Despite the changing literary landscape, she refused to alter her approach. Unlike many authors who adapted to the shifting expectations of romance readers, she stood by her belief that love stories should be about honor, virtue, and chivalry. Even as the feminist movement influenced romance fiction by introducing more independent and assertive heroines, Cartland remained loyal to her vision of love as something noble and traditional. This unwavering commitment ensured that she retained a loyal readership, even as newer generations of writers explored different themes and tones. Her golden era was a testament to her ability to understand and cater to her audience. She was not interested in literary trends or critical acclaim. Her sole focus was delivering romance in its most idealized form. This clarity of purpose allowed her to produce an unparalleled volume of work, creating a legacy that outlived many of her peers. By the 1970s, she was not just a best-selling author but an institution, with millions of devoted readers spanning multiple generations. Her books provided a sense of continuity, a reminder of a world where love was eternal, virtue was rewarded, and fairy tale endings were guaranteed. Her impact extended beyond literature. She influenced the way romance as a genre was perceived, reinforcing its role as a vehicle for escapism and emotional gratification. While some critics derided her for maintaining an outdated view of love, others recognized that her work served an important cultural function. In an era of rapid social change, her novels provided a nostalgic retreat into a world where courtship was formal, love was untainted, and relationships were guided by fate rather than personal ambition. Though her golden era lasted for decades, it was not without its challenges. As the literary market evolved, with romance fiction incorporating greater psychological depth and sensuality, Cartland's steadfast adherence to tradition began to set her apart, not always in a positive way. Yet, she remained undeterred. She viewed herself as a guardian of old-fashioned romance, a custodian of ideals that she believed were fading in a modern world driven by pragmatism and materialism. Her refusal to compromise her vision may have made her appear anachronistic to some, but it also solidified her status as a legend in the genre. Her extraordinary productivity, combined with her ability to create a consistent and recognizable brand, ensured that she became a household name. Few authors have managed to maintain such a sustained level of success over so many decades. Her golden era was defined not only by her literary output, but also by the way she seamlessly blended her personal image with her work. She did not just write romance novels, she lived and embodied them, becoming a symbol of the very ideals she championed. Her influence on the romance genre remains undeniable. Even as the landscape of romantic fiction shifted, the core elements of her stories, idealized love, noble heroes, and innocent heroines, continued to shape the expectations of countless readers. Her golden era was not merely a time of personal success, but a defining period in the history of romance literature. She proved that there was an enduring hunger for stories that offered comfort, idealism, and the promise of happily ever afters. Through sheer determination and an unyielding belief in the power of love, Barbara Cartland became an indelible figure in literary history, her legacy secured as the undisputed queen of romance. Barbara Cartland was more than just a writer, she was a cultural phenomenon. Her influence extended far beyond the pages of her novels, making her one of the most recognizable public figures of her time. She carefully cultivated a persona that embodied the ideals of old-world romance, dressing in flowing pink gowns, adorning herself with elaborate jewelry, and always presenting an air of elegance and aristocracy. Her striking visual presence, combined with her unshakable belief in traditional values, made her a favorite of the media. She was frequently invited to television interviews, radio shows, and high-profile public events, where she spoke about love, romance, and morality with unwavering confidence. Unlike many authors who preferred to remain in the background, Cartland understood the power of self-promotion. She was not just selling books. She was selling an entire lifestyle, one that revolved around glamour, tradition, and the idea that romance was the key to a fulfilling life. Her media presence played a crucial role in shaping her image as the queen of romance. She was a regular guest on talk shows, where she expressed her views on love, relationships, and the changing moral landscape of society. She frequently lamented the decline of old-fashioned courtship, criticizing modern relationships for being too transactional and lacking in genuine emotion. Her opinions were often controversial, as she was outspoken in her belief that women should aspire to be cherished and protected rather than seeking independence in the way that feminists of her era advocated. While some dismissed her as out of touch with contemporary values, her dedicated audience admired her for standing firm in her convictions. She had an almost regal presence, speaking with an air of authority that made her seem like the final word on matters of romance. Her interviews were not just promotional opportunities but platforms where she reinforced her vision of love and relationships, ensuring that her influence extended beyond literature into cultural discourse. The reach of her novels was amplified by numerous film and television adaptations, which brought her stories to life on the screen. Though she was not as widely adapted as some of her literary peers, several of her books were turned into successful films and TV productions, further cementing her status as a household name. The visual medium suited her stories well, as they were filled with sweeping romances, grand estates, and dramatic conflicts that translated seamlessly into cinematic spectacle. These adaptations allowed new audiences to discover her work, particularly those who may not have been avid readers but were drawn to the glamour and nostalgia of historical romance. The success of these adaptations helped reinforce the demand for her novels, creating a cycle in which her literary fame fed into her media presence, and vice versa. One of the most significant aspects of her public life was her close relationship with the British royal family. She was an ardent monarchist, deeply devoted to the ideals of aristocracy and tradition, which made her a natural ally of the royal household. Her connections to the royal family were not merely symbolic. She was a trusted confidant and advisor to members of the aristocracy. One of her most notable associations was with Princess Diana, to whom she was distantly related by marriage. Cartland publicly admired Diana's beauty, grace, and sense of duty, seeing in her the embodiment of the kind of noble heroine she wrote about in her novels. She also had connections to other members of the British elite, often attending high society gatherings where she mingled with politicians, royals, and celebrities. These connections added to her allure, reinforcing the image of her as a woman who lived in the very world she wrote about. Her influence extended to the broader genre of historical romance, shaping trends that persisted long after her peak years. While she did not invent the historical romance novel, she played a crucial role in popularizing it, particularly the style that emphasized innocence, aristocracy, and an idealized vision of the past. Her success demonstrated that there was a vast audience eager for stories that transported them to a world of noble gentlemen and virtuous heroines, where love was grand and fate played a central role. Other romance writers took note, and many followed in her footsteps, adopting similar themes, settings, and character archetypes. Even as romance fiction evolved, with more explicit content and modernized narratives gaining popularity, the core elements that Cartland championed, escapism, aristocratic settings, and the idealization of love, remained influential. Her impact was not only literary but also cultural. She helped define what historical romance meant for generations of readers. Beyond literature, she extended her brand into endorsements and lifestyle branding, turning herself into a symbol of luxury and refinement. Unlike many authors who focused solely on their writing careers, she embraced the idea of being a public figure whose name could be associated with elegance and romance. She launched a range of products that reflected her opulent image, including beauty and fashion items that promised to bring a touch of her signature style to the everyday lives of her fans. Her personal lifestyle, marked by grand homes, exquisite clothing, and an air of aristocratic sophistication, was itself a form of branding. She cultivated an image of timeless elegance, positioning herself as an authority not just on romance fiction but on romance as a way of life. She also made a foray into self-help and advice books, offering guidance on love, relationships, and etiquette. These works were an extension of her belief that romance was not merely a literary genre but a fundamental aspect of human existence. She wrote with the conviction that love was the highest aspiration and that true happiness could only be found through devotion, honor, and the maintenance of traditional gender roles. Her advice books, though sometimes criticized for being outdated, resonated with those who shared her longing for a more refined and genteel approach to relationships. They reflected the same ideals that permeated her novels: a belief in destiny, the virtue of innocence, and the enduring power of true love. Her cultural impact was further reinforced by her ability to stay relevant despite the changing literary landscape. While many writers fade into obscurity after their peak, she remained a formidable presence well into her later years. She continued writing prolifically, maintaining a level of productivity that few could match. Even as newer romance authors gained prominence, she retained a loyal readership that remained dedicated to her particular brand of storytelling. Her unwavering commitment to her ideals, combined with her flair for self-promotion, ensured that she remained in the public eye. She understood that her appeal was not just about the stories she wrote but about the world she represented. A world of glamour, tradition, and unshakable belief in love. Her career serves as a testament to the power of branding, persistence, and understanding one's audience. She did not chase trends or attempt to reinvent herself to suit modern tastes. Instead, she doubled down on what had made her successful in the first place. This consistency was both her greatest strength and, in some ways, her greatest limitation. While it kept her relevant to her core audience, it also meant that she was increasingly seen as a relic of a bygone era as the literary world moved forward. Nonetheless, her legacy endured, influencing generations of romance writers and readers alike. Barbara Cartland's influence stretched far beyond the written word. She was a media personality, a cultural icon, and a symbol of romance in its most traditional form. Her ability to shape the historical romance genre, her connections to royalty, and her success in lifestyle branding all contributed to her extraordinary legacy. She was not just an author but a phenomenon, embodying the ideals she wrote about in a way that few writers ever have. Whether admired or criticized, she was undeniably a force to be reckoned with, leaving an indelible mark on both literature and popular culture. Barbara Cartland's literary career, despite its immense popularity, was not without controversy and criticism. While she was beloved by millions of readers worldwide, she faced persistent accusations that her work was formulaic and lacked originality. Critics often argued that her stories followed a rigid template, with little variation between plots, characters, and themes. Her heroines were almost always young, innocent, and beautiful, while her heroes were strong, aristocratic, and often brooding. The conflicts in her novels typically revolved around misunderstandings, social barriers, or threats to virtue, but they were always resolved with an inevitable happy ending. This predictable structure, while appealing to devoted fans who sought comfort in familiar narratives, was frequently derided by literary critics who viewed her novels as unimaginative and repetitive. Many argued that she was less of a writer and more of a producer of mass-market entertainment, churning out books at an astonishing rate but with little artistic merit. This perception led to her work being dismissed by many in the literary world as literary junk food. The term suggested that while her books were easy to consume and widely enjoyed, they lacked the depth, complexity, and substance of more serious literature. Her defenders countered that she never aimed to write high literature, but rather sought to provide readers with a sense of escapism and romance. However, the dismissive attitude from critics ensured that she was rarely included in discussions of great literature, despite her commercial success. Some compared her to more nuanced romance writers who explored deeper psychological and emotional themes, arguing that her work lacked the realism and sophistication that made romance novels truly compelling. Others pointed out that even within the romance genre, she was not considered a pioneer but rather a writer who refined and capitalized on existing tropes without significantly advancing the genre. One of the most contentious aspects of her writing was its portrayal of women and gender roles. Cartland's heroines were almost universally depicted as virtuous, submissive, and in need of male protection. They often had little agency in their own stories, relying on fate or the intervention of a strong, noble hero to resolve their problems. Love, in her novels, was often portrayed as an almost magical force, with the heroine experiencing an instant and overwhelming attraction to the hero, who in turn was drawn to her innocence and beauty. This portrayal reinforced traditional gender dynamics, where women were expected to be passive, chaste, and devoted, while men were powerful and decisive. In an era that saw the rise of feminism and increasing demands for gender equality, these portrayals felt outdated and, to many, regressive. The backlash from feminists and modern romance writers was particularly strong. Feminists criticized her work for reinforcing antiquated notions of femininity, where a woman's primary goal was to find a husband and secure a life of comfort and protection. Many argued that her novels idealized a form of romantic dependency that was unrealistic and even harmful, promoting the idea that women should aspire to be saved rather than empowered. At a time when many authors were writing romance novels that featured independent, career-driven, and sexually liberated heroines, Cartland's insistence on innocence and purity seemed increasingly out of touch. Some modern romance writers viewed her work as a relic of the past, arguing that it failed to evolve with the times and did not reflect the realities of contemporary relationships. While her books remained popular among readers who longed for old-fashioned romance, they were often dismissed as irrelevant by those who believed that the genre should embrace more progressive ideals. In addition to criticisms of her themes and characterizations, Cartland was also embroiled in allegations of plagiarism and accusations that she frequently rehashed her own stories. Given her extraordinary output, publishing hundreds of books over her lifetime, there were inevitable similarities between many of her works. Critics and readers alike noticed recurring plotlines, near-identical characters, and repeated phrases across her novels. While some attributed this to the nature of her genre and the sheer volume of her writing, others saw it as evidence that she was recycling content rather than creating truly original works. There were even claims that some of her books borrowed heavily from classic literature and earlier romance writers without proper acknowledgement. The accusations of plagiarism were particularly damaging, as they suggested that her prolific success was built, at least in part, on the work of others. Some authors alleged that she had lifted ideas, characters, or entire passages from lesser-known novels, though these claims were difficult to substantiate given the broad similarities that often exist within the romance genre. Nonetheless, these allegations added to the perception that her work was formulaic, with little genuine creativity or innovation. Critics pointed out that while she had an undeniable talent for storytelling and marketing, her books lacked the depth, originality, and literary craftsmanship that defined truly enduring works of fiction. Despite these controversies, Cartland remained steadfast in her approach, dismissing her critics as out of touch with what readers actually wanted. She argued that the purpose of her books was to provide happiness and hope, not to engage in social commentary or challenge literary conventions. She maintained that romance was a timeless and universal theme, and she saw no need to alter her style or themes to accommodate changing trends. Her supporters echoed this sentiment, pointing out that the sheer number of books she sold was proof that she had tapped into something deeply resonant with readers. Her unwavering commitment to her formula, however, also contributed to her eventual decline in critical and commercial relevance. As romance fiction evolved, with more complex and diverse narratives gaining popularity, Cartland's old-fashioned approach began to feel increasingly anachronistic. The rise of more explicit, character-driven romances that explored deeper emotional and psychological conflicts made her brand of innocent, fairy tale romance seem simplistic by comparison. While she continued to have a devoted following, her influence on the genre waned as newer, more contemporary voices took center stage. Ultimately, the controversies surrounding her work highlight the tension between commercial success and literary respectability. She was undeniably one of the most prolific and widely read authors of her time, yet she never achieved the critical acclaim that many of her peers received. Her defenders argued that her ability to bring joy to millions of readers was more important than the approval of critics, while her detractors insisted that her reliance on formulaic storytelling and outdated gender roles limited the artistic and cultural value of her work. Whether celebrated as a master storyteller or dismissed as a purveyor of literary escapism, Barbara Cartland remained a polarizing figure in the world of romance fiction. Her legacy continues to spark debate, reflecting the ongoing evolution of the genre and the shifting expectations of readers and critics alike. Barbara Cartland's reign as the undisputed queen of romance faced increasing challenges in the 1980s and 1990s as the literary landscape of romantic fiction began to shift. For decades, her formulaic approach to storytelling had captivated millions, providing an escape into a world of aristocratic elegance, unwavering virtue, and fairy tale romance. However, as societal norms evolved and the genre underwent transformation, her style of romance gradually lost its dominance. Readers who once adored the simplicity of her narratives found themselves drawn to novels that reflected a more modern, nuanced, and independent portrayal of love and relationships. The world had changed, and so had its expectations for romance fiction. One of the key reasons for the decline in Cartland's popularity was the changing nature of heroines in romantic fiction. The traditional, passive, and innocent young women she championed were increasingly seen as outdated. The new wave of romance novels featured heroines who were not merely waiting to be saved by a dashing, aristocratic hero but were independent, ambitious, and driven. The ideal of the helpless maiden in need of protection was giving way to women who could navigate their own destinies, challenge societal expectations, and take control of their romantic and professional lives. Readers wanted characters who mirrored their own struggles and aspirations, rather than adhering to old-fashioned notions of femininity. The rise of more complex, feminist romance novels played a significant role in reshaping the genre. By the 1980s, feminist ideas had taken deeper root in literature, challenging traditional gender dynamics and portraying relationships with greater depth. Writers began to craft heroines who defied societal expectations, actively pursued their desires, and embraced their sexuality without shame. These stories did not always conclude with marriage as the ultimate reward. Instead, they explored the emotional journeys of love, self-discovery, and personal growth. Romance novels were no longer just about purity and devotion, but also about passion, ambition, and equality within relationships. Many readers found these themes more relevant to their own experiences and shifted away from the idyllic, chaste romances that Cartland continued to write. Despite these changes, Barbara Cartland remained steadfast in her approach. She resisted any attempt to modernize her narratives, refusing to alter her vision of romance. For her, love was an unwavering, timeless force that did not require reinvention. Her novels continued to follow the same structure that had brought her success: innocent heroines, aristocratic heroes, and happy endings free from the complications of modern relationships. While this consistency endeared her to loyal fans, it also alienated younger readers who were drawn to the evolving landscape of romantic fiction. Unlike many of her contemporaries who adapted to changing tastes, she remained firmly rooted in a bygone era, unwilling to compromise the ideals she cherished. The competition she faced from newer authors only intensified her decline. Writers like Danielle Steele and Nora Roberts emerged as dominant forces in the genre, offering stories that blended romance with drama, mystery, and deep emotional exploration. Unlike Cartland's idealized portrayals of love, their books reflected the complexities of real relationships, addressing themes of betrayal, heartbreak, ambition, and resilience. Their heroines were often career-driven women who faced real-world struggles, making them more relatable to contemporary audiences. While Cartland's aristocratic settings and nostalgic charm retained an audience, it was clear that the new generation of romance readers sought something different: stories that resonated with the changing roles of women in society. Another significant challenge came from the rise of Harlequin romance novels, which dominated the mass-market paperback industry. Harlequin offered a vast array of romance subgenres, catering to different tastes and interests. Their books were often more passionate, fast-paced, and diverse, appealing to readers who wanted romance with a modern twist. Unlike Cartland's predictable narratives, Harlequin romances featured a variety of relationship dynamics, ranging from workplace romances to stories with strong-willed heroines overcoming real-life obstacles. Their marketing strategies were also more aggressive, ensuring that their books reached a global audience with a level of accessibility that Cartland's novels struggled to maintain. As the publishing industry moved into the digital era, Cartland's presence began to fade further. The 1990s saw a rapid transformation in how books were marketed, sold, and consumed. The rise of bookstores like Barnes & Noble and Borders, along with the emergence of online retailers, shifted the way readers discovered and purchased books. New authors gained prominence through effective marketing, promotional tours, and media appearances, while Cartland's traditional approach to publicity, largely centered on her flamboyant persona, began to feel outdated. Her insistence on sticking to her well-established formula limited her ability to compete in a market that was rapidly evolving. The decline in book sales was inevitable. While she still retained a devoted following, her readership was aging, and younger audiences were more drawn to authors who reflected contemporary experiences and diverse perspectives. The romance genre had expanded beyond the aristocratic fantasies she specialized in, incorporating multicultural romances, LGBTQ+ narratives, and stories set in varied, dynamic settings. The limited scope of her novels, once a mark of consistency, now seemed restrictive compared to the vast range of romantic fiction available. Additionally, the literary world was becoming more critical of the kind of escapism she offered. Readers and critics alike began to question whether her unwavering depiction of romance as pure, uncomplicated, and hierarchical was still relevant. The idea that love was best found within the nobility, that heroines should remain innocent until marriage, and that passion should always be restrained seemed increasingly out of step with modern values. While nostalgia still played a role in her appeal, it was not enough to sustain the massive readership she once commanded. Even in the face of declining popularity, Cartland remained unapologetic about her approach. She continued to write prolifically, producing hundreds of novels well into her later years. Her belief in the power of love and virtue never wavered, and she remained convinced that her vision of romance was timeless. However, the publishing industry and the readers had moved on, embracing new voices and fresh perspectives that better reflected the evolving nature of relationships and romance. By the time she passed away in 2000, Barbara Cartland's influence had significantly diminished compared to the heights of her career. While she remained a cultural icon, remembered for her extravagant image and prolific output, her books no longer held the same dominance in the market. The romance genre had undergone a revolution, shaped by authors who were willing to explore love in all its complexities, and her brand of storytelling had largely been left behind. Though her legacy endures as one of the most prolific romance writers in history, her decline in the latter decades of the 20th century serves as a testament to the ever-changing nature of literature and the evolving expectations of readers. Barbara Cartland remained an unwavering force in romance literature even as her popularity waned in her later years. Despite the shifting literary landscape, she continued writing with the same passion and dedication that had defined her career for decades. Her prolific nature did not slow down. She produced an astonishing number of books well into her 90s, refusing to alter her storytelling formula to fit modern tastes. For her, romance was timeless, and the principles of love, purity, and devotion that had shaped her novels remained just as relevant in the 1990s as they had been in the 1920s. However, while she held on to her beliefs and her distinctive style, the world around her was changing, and her position as the queen of romance fiction was no longer unchallenged. The decline in her popularity was not immediate, but by the 1990s, it had become evident that her influence had significantly diminished. Her readership, once vast and devoted, had begun to dwindle as younger audiences gravitated toward contemporary authors who reflected the evolving dynamics of love, relationships, and society. The new generation of romance readers sought heroines who were independent, strong-willed, and actively shaping their own destinies, whereas Cartland's idealized vision of love often centered on passive, innocent women waiting for their destined aristocratic hero. This disconnect with modern audiences made her books feel increasingly outdated, limiting her appeal beyond those who had grown up with her stories. Despite these challenges, she never wavered in her dedication to her craft. She continued to write at an astonishing pace, often dictating multiple novels at once. Her determination to keep producing work was a testament to her love for storytelling, but it also reflected a reluctance to acknowledge the fundamental changes occurring in the genre she had once dominated. Unlike other writers who adapted their narratives to suit contemporary trends, Cartland remained steadfast in her belief that romance should adhere to traditional values. She saw modern love stories as cynical, overly sexualized, and lacking the purity that had once defined romance literature. The struggle to adapt to modern literary trends became increasingly evident in her relationship with publishers. For decades, Cartland had been a reliable best-selling author, with her books flying off shelves and her name synonymous with romance fiction. However, as the market shifted, publishers became less enthusiastic about producing her work in the same quantities as before. The demand for her novels had declined, and while she continued to write, securing widespread distribution became more difficult. Some publishers began to phase out her titles in favor of newer authors whose works resonated more with contemporary audiences. The industry had moved in a different direction, and her refusal to change meant that she was gradually being left behind. During this period, her public perception also began to shift. While she had always been a flamboyant figure, known for her extravagant fashion, pink attire, and outspoken opinions, her views on romance and morality seemed increasingly out of touch with modern sensibilities. She was often criticized for her rigid views on gender roles and her belief in a chaste, fairy tale version of love that many saw as unrealistic. Feminists, in particular, challenged her portrayal of women, arguing that her characters reinforced outdated stereotypes that did not reflect the complexities of real-life relationships. Cartland, however, dismissed such criticisms, insisting that her vision of romance was not only valid but essential in a world that she believed had become too cynical about love. Despite the literary world moving on, she remained a well-known figure in British popular culture. Her connections to high society, including her relationship with the British royal family, kept her in the public eye. She famously served as a step-grandmother to Princess Diana, a relationship that further cemented her aristocratic image. However, even as she maintained a public presence, it was clear that her era of dominance in romance literature had passed. The younger generation of writers, including the likes of Danielle Steele and Nora Roberts, had taken over, offering readers more complex, emotionally layered stories that better reflected the realities of contemporary romance. Her later years were marked by increasing health struggles. As she grew older, maintaining her famously energetic and glamorous persona became more difficult. Although she remained committed to writing, her physical condition deteriorated, and she faced various health complications. Still, she refused to slow down, dictating books from her bed and continuing to engage with her loyal readers whenever possible. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained resilient, and she never lost her belief in the power of love and romance. Barbara Cartland passed away on May 21, 2000, at the age of 98. Her death marked the end of an extraordinary literary career that had spanned nearly 8 decades. She left behind a legacy of over 700 novels, a Guinness World Record for her prolific output, and a reputation as one of the most recognizable romance writers of all time. Although her influence had waned in her later years, her impact on the genre remained undeniable. She had defined an era of romance literature, and even as the genre evolved beyond her vision, her name remained synonymous with the classic, fairy tale notion of love. Her passing was met with a mix of nostalgia and reflection. While many acknowledged her contributions to the genre, others viewed her as a relic of a bygone literary era. Her insistence on maintaining traditional values in romance had made her both beloved and controversial, and her legacy was as much about her storytelling as it was about the broader cultural debates surrounding gender roles and romantic ideals. Regardless of the varying opinions on her work, there was no denying that Barbara Cartland had shaped the world of romantic fiction in a way few writers ever had. In the years following her death, her books continued to be reprinted, though their presence in mainstream bookstores became less prominent. Her legacy was kept alive by devoted fans and collectors who treasured her unique style of romance. Some of her unpublished manuscripts were later released posthumously, adding to her already staggering bibliography. However, by the 21st century, romance literature had firmly moved into new territories, embracing diverse narratives, complex relationships, and heroines with agency that stood in stark contrast to the passive figures in Cartland's novels. Even as the world moved on from her particular brand of romance, Barbara Cartland remained an unforgettable figure in literary history. Her name was forever linked to an era of romance that celebrated innocence, aristocratic elegance, and the unwavering belief in love's triumph. Whether viewed as a trailblazer or as a writer unwilling to change with the times, her influence on the genre was undeniable. She had created a world where love was pure, heroes were noble, and happy endings were guaranteed. And though the literary landscape had shifted beyond her reach, she remained, in many ways, the ultimate symbol of the classic romance novel. Barbara Cartland's legacy is one of both reverence and contention. As one of the most prolific authors in history, her contributions to romance fiction cannot be ignored, yet the modern literary landscape has evolved far beyond the world she once ruled. In the years following her passing in 2000, her name retained a nostalgic glow, particularly among older readers who had grown up with her stories of chaste love, aristocratic settings, and fairy tale-like happy endings. Her influence, however, gradually faded as newer generations of romance readers sought more diverse, complex, and contemporary narratives. Despite this, her legacy remains embedded in the fabric of romance literature, even if it is sometimes viewed as a relic of a bygone era. One of the key ways in which Cartland's name endured after her death was through posthumous releases. Due to her immense output, many of her manuscripts remained unpublished at the time of her passing. Her estate, recognizing the demand among her loyal readership, made efforts to bring these unpublished works to the public. Several of these novels were released in the early 2000s, though their reception was muted compared to the peak of her fame. By this time, the romance genre had shifted considerably, making her signature style feel outdated to many readers. Nevertheless, collectors and longtime fans welcomed the opportunity to revisit the world of romance she had so meticulously crafted. Attempts were also made to revive the Barbara Cartland brand. Given her larger-than-life personality, her estate sought to market her work in new ways, repackaging older novels and reintroducing her as a timeless figure in romance literature. However, these efforts faced challenges. While she had once been a household name, the new wave of romance readers was more interested in contemporary storytelling, featuring heroines who defied traditional roles, diverse cultural settings, and narratives that embraced complexity. Cartland's formulaic approach, which had once been a selling point, was now a barrier to her resurgence. Despite these obstacles, her influence on future romance authors was undeniable. Writers who emerged in the late 20th and early 21st centuries often acknowledged the role Cartland played in shaping the genre. While many moved away from her specific tropes, they recognized her contribution in making romance literature a dominant force in publishing. She had proven that romance novels could be commercially successful and had created a blueprint for rapid mass-market publishing that later authors, such as Danielle Steele and Nora Roberts, would refine and modernize. The question of her place in literary history remains a subject of debate. To some, she is an enduring legend, a woman who defined romance for an entire generation and left an indelible mark on the genre. To others, she is a forgotten relic, her novels overshadowed by the more dynamic and inclusive storytelling that has come to define modern romance literature. Unlike authors such as Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters, whose works have been continually reinterpreted and celebrated, Cartland's stories have not enjoyed the same level of lasting critical appreciation. They remain popular in niche circles but are rarely discussed in broader literary discourse. One of the most significant shifts in romance literature after Cartland was the evolution of the romantic heroine. While her books often featured innocent, passive heroines who relied on a strong male figure for their happily ever after, modern romance writers began to craft female protagonists who were independent, ambitious, and in control of their own destinies. The heroines of the late 20th and early 21st centuries were no longer simply waiting for love to find them. They pursued it on their own terms, often challenging societal expectations along the way. This shift reflected broader cultural changes, as women's roles in society and literature became more empowered and self-determined. Another major transformation in romance literature was the rise of LGBTQ+ representation and multicultural narratives. While Cartland's romances were largely confined to European aristocratic settings with strictly heterosexual pairings, contemporary romance novels have embraced a much wider spectrum of relationships. LGBTQ+ romance novels have flourished, with stories exploring love beyond heteronormative confines. Similarly, multicultural romances that highlight diverse backgrounds, traditions, and experiences have gained immense popularity, reflecting the increasingly global readership of the genre. This broadening of perspectives has allowed romance literature to resonate with a wider audience than ever before, making the genre more inclusive and reflective of the real world. The rise of digital publishing and self-published romance authors also marked a stark contrast to Cartland's era. While she dominated the traditional publishing world, the advent of digital platforms allowed independent authors to bypass major publishers and reach readers directly. Self-publishing platforms like Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, and online storytelling communities such as Wattpad revolutionized the romance market, giving rise to new voices that may have otherwise been overlooked. Many of these authors introduced innovative, diverse, and experimental narratives that deviated significantly from the formulas that had defined romance literature in Cartland's time. This shift not only democratized the industry but also allowed for a much faster response to changing reader preferences. The impact of new media, particularly BookTok, the book-loving community on TikTok, has further transformed the romance genre. Unlike the days when Cartland's books were marketed through traditional publishing channels, today's romance novels often gain popularity through viral trends, reader recommendations, and social media discourse. Books that align with current cultural interests, such as enemies to lovers tropes, morally complex characters, and emotionally intense narratives, tend to rise to prominence rapidly, often outselling traditionally published bestsellers. This new model of audience-driven success is a stark departure from the structured publishing empire that Cartland once ruled. In light of these changes, one might ask, what remains of Cartland's legacy in today's romance market? While her style of romance has largely faded from mainstream popularity, elements of her influence can still be seen. The escapist nature of romance novels, which she championed so effectively, continues to be a core appeal of the genre. Many contemporary romance authors still draw from fairy tale-like storytelling, aristocratic settings, and the promise of a satisfying happy ending, though they now weave these elements into narratives that feature modern sensibilities and diverse characters. Ultimately, Barbara Cartland's legacy is a paradox. She was once an unstoppable literary force, shaping the romantic fantasies of millions. Yet, her refusal to evolve with the times meant that her influence diminished as the genre she helped popularize grew beyond her vision. Today, she is remembered as both a trailblazer and a figure of nostalgia, an author whose vast body of work remains a testament to a specific era of romance literature. Whether she is seen as an enduring legend or a relic of the past depends largely on the lens through which one views the ever-changing world of romance fiction. Barbara Cartland's journey in the literary world is a fascinating study of success, cultural impact, and eventual decline. Her rise to prominence was nothing short of remarkable, fueled by an uncanny ability to understand the romantic fantasies of her time. With a career spanning over 7 decades, she became one of the most prolific authors in history, crafting stories that resonated with millions of readers worldwide. Her books, often set in aristocratic and historical settings, followed a tried-and-tested formula that emphasized love at first sight, virtue, and sweeping romantic ideals. At her peak, she was not just a writer but a cultural icon, known for her distinctive pink dresses, elaborate hats, and an unwavering belief in the purity of love. However, as the decades progressed, the world around her began to change. The feminist movements of the 1960s and 1970s introduced new ideas about gender roles, independence, and the nature of love, making Cartland's formula feel increasingly outdated. While her books continued to sell, they no longer defined the genre as they once had. By the 1980s and 1990s, romance literature had evolved significantly, embracing more complex heroines, diverse settings, and emotionally layered relationships. Authors like Danielle Steele and Nora Roberts, with their more contemporary and psychologically nuanced stories, began to dominate the market, appealing to readers who sought something beyond Cartland's rigidly structured narratives. Despite her decline in popularity, her influence on the romance genre is undeniable. She helped solidify romance as a commercially viable and globally popular genre. The sheer scale of her output demonstrated that there was an insatiable demand for love stories, inspiring publishers to invest more in romance writers. Her success paved the way for the mass-market romance industry, setting a precedent for prolific authorship and rapid publication cycles. In this sense, she was a pioneer, proving that romance fiction could be a legitimate and highly lucrative form of literature. The question of whether her fall was due to cultural shifts or her own resistance to change is complex. On one hand, the world was moving in a direction that no longer aligned with the type of romance she wrote. Readers began seeking stories with stronger, more independent heroines, relationships that were more nuanced, and narratives that reflected contemporary realities. The rise of LGBTQ+ romance, multicultural narratives, and digital publishing platforms introduced an entirely new dynamic to the genre, one that Cartland's rigidly traditional approach could not accommodate. On the other hand, her unwillingness to adapt played a significant role in her decline. While other romance writers evolved with the times, Cartland remained steadfast in her portrayal of love and relationships, refusing to embrace modern sensibilities. She openly criticized contemporary romance trends, believing that they deviated from the purity and idealism she valued. This resistance to change meant that while other authors gained new readerships, Cartland's audience gradually diminished, consisting mainly of long-time fans rather than new generations of readers. There are valuable lessons to be learned from her career, particularly for modern writers. One of the most important takeaways is the necessity of adaptation. The literary world is constantly shifting, influenced by social, political, and cultural changes. Writers who remain flexible and open to new ideas are more likely to maintain relevance over time. Cartland's unwillingness to modernize her narratives ultimately contributed to her decline, serving as a cautionary tale about the risks of resisting change. Another lesson is the power of branding. Cartland was not just an author, she was a persona. Her carefully curated image, complete with a distinctive fashion sense and a strong association with traditional romantic ideals, helped her stand out in an industry that was becoming increasingly competitive. While her brand eventually became a limitation, it was also a major factor in her initial success. Modern authors can learn from this by recognizing the importance of cultivating a unique voice and presence in the literary world, particularly in an era where social media and digital marketing play a crucial role in an author's reach. Additionally, her career highlights the importance of storytelling fundamentals. While her plots may have been repetitive, they tapped into universal themes of love, longing, and the search for happiness. These elements remain at the heart of romance literature, even as the genre evolves. Writers today can draw from Cartland's understanding of emotional engagement while also pushing the boundaries of what romance novels can be. Looking ahead, the future of romance novels is bright and ever-expanding. The genre continues to be one of the most popular in publishing, with new subgenres emerging regularly. From contemporary romance to fantasy romance, from LGBTQ+ love stories to culturally diverse narratives, romance fiction is more inclusive and varied than ever before. Digital publishing, self-publishing platforms, and social media-driven trends such as BookTok have revolutionized the way romance novels reach audiences, making it easier for fresh voices to emerge. While Barbara Cartland's brand of romance may no longer dominate the market, her impact lingers in the foundations of the genre. She proved that love stories could be a literary and commercial powerhouse, laying the groundwork for future authors to build upon. Though she may not have adapted to changing times, her legacy remains a testament to the enduring appeal of romance fiction. Whether viewed as a pioneer, an icon of a bygone era, or a cautionary figure, Barbara Cartland's influence on romance literature is indelible.